A week after my wife's funeral, my son asked me to sign a document. He said it was for insurance purposes. Something about updating the beneficiary on her policy now that she was gone. He slid it across the kitchen table with a pen on top. And I remember thinking how strange it was that he'd brought his own pen. A nice one. Heavy. Like he'd planned this. I didn't sign it. Not because I was suspicious. I was barely functioning. 67 years old. 39 years of marriage behind me, and suddenly the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. I didn't sign it because my hands were shaking and I couldn't read the small print, and I told him I'd look at it later. He nodded. He took the pen back and put it in his shirt pocket and said, "Of course, Dad. No rush." He left the document on the table. I found it 3 days later under a stack of sympathy cards. I still didn't read it. I folded it and put it in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the dead batteries, and told myself I'd deal with it when I could think straight again. That was November. By January, I was starting to think straight. My name is Raymond. I spent 31 years as a claims adjuster for an insurance company in Columbus, Ohio. I know what documents look like. I know what fine print is for, and I know why people bring their own pens. I pulled that paper out of the drawer on a Tuesday morning in January, and I read every word. It was not an insurance beneficiary update. It was a durable power of attorney, signed, or meant to be signed, by me, granting my son full legal authority over my financial accounts, my real estate, and my medical decisions. It was backdated to October, 2 weeks before my wife passed. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. My son is 41 years old. His name is Garrett. He works in sales, or he says he does. The company changes every couple of years, and I've stopped keeping track. His wife is named Priya. She's the one who manages things. I've always known that. She manages the money. She manages the calendar. She manages Garrett. She is not a bad person, or I didn't think so. She's a practical person, and practical people, I've learned, can do things that look a lot like bad when the stakes are high enough. They have a daughter in 2nd grade and a mortgage in Dublin, the suburb north of Columbus, and I know they've been stretched thin because Garrett told me so himself at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. He'd had 2 glasses of wine and he leaned over and said, "Dad, honestly, I don't know how you and Mom did it." I told him his mother was better with money than either of us gave her credit for. That was true. Eleanor managed everything. She had a system. When Eleanor died, the system became mine to manage. And apparently that made some people nervous. I called a lawyer the same afternoon I read that document. Not a family friend, not someone Garrett knew. I drove 40 minutes to a firm in Westerville that I'd found by looking them up myself, paid the consultation fee in cash, and sat down across from a woman named Patricia who had a law degree from Ohio State and a look on her face that told me she'd heard worse. I told her everything. I showed her the document. She read it once, asked me 2 questions, and then set it down on the desk between us. "You never signed this," she said. "No. Does your son know that?" "I don't think he's checked." She nodded slowly. "Mr. Tall, Raymond, I want you to do something for me before you leave this office today." She explained what I needed to do. I listened carefully. I have always been a good listener. On the drive home, I called Garrett. I kept my voice exactly the way I always sound. Tired, a little slow, still sad, which wasn't hard because I was still sad. I told him I'd been going through some of your mother's paperwork and I was feeling overwhelmed. He said he was sorry. I said I thought maybe he was right about that document, the one he'd left on the table. Maybe I should go ahead and take care of it. He said he could come by Sunday. I said that would be fine. I didn't tell him I'd already spoken to Patricia. I didn't tell him I'd already called my bank. I didn't tell him I'd already made an appointment with a different estate attorney to update my actual will. I did ask him how Priya was doing. He said she was great, really great, They'd just been talking about maybe looking at some properties in the area, investment properties. It was a good time to buy. I said that sounded smart. We said goodbye. I hung up and sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes. I want to tell you what this felt like because I think people assume that when a parent realizes something like this about their child, it hits like a lightning bolt, a single moment of shock. But it isn't like that. It's more like a long, slow chill. Like when you're driving and you realize the road has been icy for the last half mile, and you just didn't feel it until now. And you think, how long have I been on this ice? How far back does it go? I felt back to the calls in the last year about the mortgage, the hints around the holidays, the comment Garrett made in September about how big the house was for just one person now. I thought about Priya at the funeral, how efficient she was, how she handled the caterer and the flower arrangement and the guest list, and I had been grateful, and I had told her so. I thought about how strange it was that she had organized everything and smiled at everyone, and then, 6 days later, my son was sitting at my kitchen table with a nice pen and a document backdated by 2 weeks. I thought, how long have I been on this ice? Sunday came. Garrett arrived at noon. Priya came with him, which I hadn't expected. But I kept my face easy and I said, "Come in, I'll put on coffee." She hugged me at the door. She smelled like something expensive. She asked how I was sleeping, and I said, "Better. Getting better." She said, "Good." That was so good. Her hand on my arm was warm, and I thought about ice again. Garrett sat at the same spot at the kitchen table where he always sits. Priya sat next to him. I got the coffee going and put out the cookies Elena used to buy, shortbreads, the ones in the blue tin, and then I sat down across from them and I put my hands flat on the table. "I found that paper you left," I said. Garrett said, "Right, yeah. I just thought it might make things easier on you. Just in case anything ever." "I read it carefully," I said. Priya said, "Of course. We just want to make sure you're protected, Raymond. That's all this is." I looked at her. She was good. I'll give her that. She had the face of someone doing a favor. "I showed it to a lawyer," I said. The room changed. It wasn't anything dramatic. Garrett didn't stand up or say anything loud. It was the kind of change that happens in the air, the way a room gets a degree colder and you're not sure why. He looked at Priya. She looked at her coffee cup. "A lawyer," Garrett said. "Patricia, over in Westerville. Very sharp. She had some questions about the date on the document." I let that sit. Said it might cause some confusion, legally speaking, given that date. Priya picked up her coffee cup with both hands, set it back down. I kept going. My voice was calm. "This is the thing about spending 31 years in claims adjustment. You learn to deliver bad news without drama. You learn that the words do the work. You don't need to raise your voice when the facts are already loud." I told them that I had, with Patricia's help, established a revocable living trust the previous week. My house, my investment accounts, and Eleanor's life insurance proceeds. All of it transferred into the trust. The trust named my brother Dennis as sole trustee in the event of my incapacity or death. Dennis lives in Cincinnati. He is steady and boring, and he has never once asked me about my finances, which is exactly why I chose him. I told them I had also filed a formal complaint with the Ohio State Bar regarding the document Garrett had left. Not because I wanted to cause trouble, but because Patricia had advised me that the backdating needed to be on record somewhere. I told them that my bank had been notified to flag any unusual activity and that I had changed my online passwords. And then I stopped talking. Garrett looked like a man who had reached into his coat pocket for something and found the pocket empty. He opened his mouth once, closed it. Priya said, "Raymond, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I said, "There might have been. I think it's been cleared up now." She said, "We were just trying to help." "I know," I said. "I meant it in a way. I think she probably started out trying to help. I think the helping just slowly became something else when the numbers got too big to ignore. I've seen it happen in families. I spent 31 years watching people make hard decisions when money was involved, and I never once met a person who described themselves as greedy. They always had a reason. It was always for someone else. The kids, the mortgage, the future. I didn't say any of that. I said, "How's the coffee?" Garrett said it was good. We sat there for another 20 minutes. Pry asked about Thanksgiving, whether I'd be coming to their place or if I wanted them to come to me. I said I hadn't thought that far ahead. She said, "Of course, of course, take your time." They left at 1:30. I stood at the window and watched Garrett's car pull out of the driveway and turn down the street. And I felt, this is hard to describe. I felt something like the end of a very long drive, that particular exhaustion that only comes when you've been tense for longer than you realized and you finally stop moving. My legs felt heavy. My chest felt heavy. But I was home. I called Dennis that night. He already knew most of it. I talked to him before I went to Patricia, but I told him how Sunday had gone and he listened without interrupting, which is something Dennis is very good at. He said, "How do you feel?" I said I wasn't sure yet. He said, "Do you think they'll try again?" I thought about Priya's hand on my arm at the door. Warm. Practiced. "I think," I said, "that they'll be very nice to me for a while." Dennis laughed a little. It wasn't a happy laugh. In March, Garrett called to ask if I'd considered selling the house, given that it was big and I was alone. He said property values in my neighborhood were strong and I could use the cash to move somewhere with less upkeep. I said I'd think about it. I didn't tell him the house was now in a trust and he couldn't touch it regardless of what I decided. In April, Priya texted to ask if I wanted to come to dinner. She was making the lamb chops she knows I like. I said I was busy that weekend. In May, Garrett called again, and this time his voice was different, quieter. He said he'd been thinking about a lot of things and he wanted me to know he was sorry. That the document had been a mistake. That he should have talked to me directly. That things had gotten, he paused, out of hand. I said I appreciated that. He asked if we could have dinner sometime, just us, no agenda. I said sure. We had dinner at a steakhouse in Easton in late May. He ordered the ribeye, and I ordered the salmon, and we talked about the Buckeyes, and about his daughter's recital, and about nothing that mattered. At the end of the night, he picked up the check before I could, and I let him. Walking out to the parking lot, he said, "I really am sorry, Dad." I looked at him in the parking lot light. My son, 41 years old. He looked tired in a way I recognized because I see it in the mirror too. Life is expensive and fast, and everyone is trying to outrun something. I said, "I know, Garrett. I meant that too. I don't know what we are now. Not what we were before. Not quite. But not nothing. Some things, once they've been handled, leave a scar that's smooth enough to live with. You don't forget it's there. You just stop checking. I go to church on Sunday mornings, and I have coffee with my neighbor Frank on Tuesdays, and I keep the lawn the way Eleanor would have wanted it. I visit Dennis in Cincinnati every couple of months. I renewed my fishing license this spring. First time in 4 years, and last weekend I drove out to Alum Creek and sat by the water for 3 hours and didn't catch a thing and felt completely fine about that. The house is in the trust. The accounts are protected. The lawyer's number is in my phone under favorites. I am 67 years old and I am no one's opportunity. And every now and then, when I'm sitting at that kitchen table in the morning, coffee in hand, looking at the spot where that document used to sit under the sympathy cards, I think about Eleanor and her system and how she always said, "Raymond, the most important thing is to pay attention." She meant to the money, to the paperwork, to the fine print. But I think she might have meant to everything. I've thought a lot about what made Garrett do it. Not because I'm still angry, I'm not. Or at least I'm something more complicated than angry. But because I think understanding it matters for me. And maybe for anyone who's sitting somewhere right now wondering if they're reading the room wrong about someone they love. Here's what I believe. People don't usually start out trying to hurt you. They start out scared. Garrett was scared of his mortgage, scared of the gap between what he earned and what his life cost, scared of watching his daughter grow up in a house that felt too small. Fear is a patient thing. It sits with you for long enough, and it starts to sound like reason. It starts to sound like, well, dad won't live forever, and the money will come to us eventually anyway, so this isn't really wrong, is it? This is just practical. This is just getting ahead of the paperwork. That's how it happens. Not with malice, with math. But here's the other side of that. The side I had to reckon with, too. I almost didn't read that document. I almost let it sit in that drawer until my hands stopped shaking and my head cleared. And by then, who knows? I was 67 years old and I was grieving and I was tired. And those three things together make a person very easy to take advantage of. Not because grief makes you stupid, because grief makes you trust the people who show up. You're so grateful anyone is there at all that you stop asking why they came. Eleanor always said, pay attention. She said it about money and paperwork and fine print, but what she really meant was, don't let your guard down just because someone is family. Love and loyalty are not the same thing. You have to watch for both, separately. I paid attention. That's the only reason this story ends the way it does. Not luck, not some outside force deciding to protect me. I drove to Westerville. I called Dennis. I called my bank. I sat across from Patricia, and I listened to every word she said. That's it. That's the whole of it. I did the hard, quiet, unglamorous work of protecting myself, and it made all the difference. There's something in that worth holding on to. The idea that wisdom isn't about knowing everything in advance. It's about being willing to act on what you find out, even when it's painful, even when the person who put you in danger is someone you raised. Intelligence without the courage to use it is just information. What saved me wasn't that I was smart. It was that I was willing to do something uncomfortable with what I knew. I also had to accept that I couldn't fix Garrett. I could protect my house, my accounts, my future. I couldn't reach back through 41 years and make him into someone who wouldn't have done this. That's not how it works. People choose who they become, slowly, one small decision at a time, and the consequences follow at the same pace. Not as punishment, just as result. That's the thing about cause and effect. It's not dramatic. It's not dramatic. It's just steady. Garrett made choices, and they led somewhere. I made choices, and they led somewhere else. And now we're both living in the places those choices built. I still answer when he calls. I'm still his father. But I keep the trust documents in a fireproof safe, and Patricia's number is in my phone, and I check my accounts every Monday morning with coffee before I do anything else. Eleanor would approve of that system.